Hi there. I wanted to speak this week about financial leadership and what is financial leadership? We hear so much about it, but what does it mean for us? And another term that I like is financial stewardship. Are we actually a steward in the world of business and in the larger ecosystem of life? Are we really a true leadership, or are we really being a steward? And I think a big part of our role actually is a steward, because we are the steward of the numbers. And when I talk to my participants in some of the training courses that I run, I talk about financial stewardship, and I also think about strategic thinking. So I think about stewardship thinking and strategic thinking, and how how do we move from being sort of that steward in the detail and in the data to being the bigger picture player and thinking about the strategy and the bigger ecosystem that we're operating within. And I think, to sort of be the gel or the glue between those two states of being is about being a catalyst of change. And I introduce that concept to a lot of finance business partners and also CFOs that I coach and mentor about, having that catalytic energy inside of us. And we all have the ability to draw on that, because we know that change is or can be the hardest thing for us and individuals to do. But I think the change is where the secret sauce is of being that future proofed and being that resilient leader, whether that's in finance or any other business owner discipline. But today I want to talk about financial leadership and what does that mean to me. And I'd like to talk about three different tensions, if I may. The first tension is around this concept of innovation versus optimization. And I think as a CFO, and I've heard a lot of finance leaders talk about, and I've spoken about it myself, cost optimization, and that's kind of like the sort of nirvana that we want to get to. How do we be more efficient with what we're doing, and how do we kind of remove all these costs from our business so that we're optimizing our cost base and improving our margins? If we can't grow and keep growing our top line, then surely we can improve our bottom line. But what I would provocate us to think about is, should we be thinking about cost optimization, and or should we be thinking about innovation? And is it one at the expense of the other? Because I now feel that innovation is actually the driving force of having a business that's fit for the future. If we can think about how to innovate, how do we think about not just product innovation, but systems innovation and design process innovation? And I think as a finance leader, we should be looking at every step within our whole value web from end to end, or if it's, I think it's more of a circular diagram, then how do we think about the whole movement in that innovation value web, that we're an ecosystem in our business? So, thinking about an innovation matrix and, what is the cost of innovation versus the impact that it has on our market. And I think, how do we think about being disruptive in our innovation, and how can we think about being radical and not just doing more with more, but how do we do more with less? So if it's concepts like these that you haven't been familiar with, then I would suggest having a look at innovation out there and how do we bring that into our own business. So the second tension I want to talk about is, how do we define success? And this is a huge, huge area for businesses, and especially for us in finance. How do we redefine success? And a large part of my career, success was all about growth and all about margin. And I think over the last 10 years, I'm starting to really think about more than just financial success, and how do we think about the impact that we're making in our business. So having a think about the measures, what is our first measure of success? And I would encourage you to think about getting outside of our finance only thinking around being innovative with our measures of success, maybe even thinking about the cycles of how we report. Now, I know that we're driven a lot by quarterly, 6-monthly, 12-monthly cycles and month-end reporting. But how can we move away from that? What might it look like if we weren't spending 80% of our time on month-end and spending 80% of our time on forward-looking trajectories as finance leaders and our finance teams? Wouldn't that be awesome? What could that change in our business if we just changed the cycle, the patterns that we are so embedded with? And then thirdly, how do we reward success? And I wrote a blog about this back in 2015 that said, you know, we get what we pay for effectively. Well, sometimes we don't even get that. So, you know, I wrote a blog about a very provocative subject on, is the CEO worth the money that we pay them? And I think this is what drives a lot of business behaviors, where the CEO or the leadership team is being incentivized to keep churning out more profits, more revenue, more margin, whatever that might be, and very egocentric. And you know, it's no surprise that the leadership or the CEO doesn't want to make a huge catalytic change when they're very happy with what's going on, thanks very much, because it's paying me a percentage of my short-term incentive, or I get, you know, extra shares based on the share price. These measures are really challenging for us to drive different behavior in our business. So I would get yourself to think about, how might we reward different behaviors? And you know, sometimes those conversations are hard to have with the CEO to talk about his incentive, but maybe there's pockets of light, of opportunities in the board. Maybe the chair has got more ideas around impact rather than just financial measures. There might be some opportunity to have a discussion about different types of reward measures. And then finally, as a finance leader, it's really about people, and how do we think about leading our people, and not just our internal people, but actually inside and outside of our organization. How do we have conversations at the board level with the chairman, with the audit and risk chair, to think about doing better business, changing up over the next 12 months, over the next 3 years, looking at what a new set of performance measures might look like. So how do we have those conversations and drive change in our organization, and you know, and driving different behaviors in our people? You know, at the moment we're so focused, well, I'm focused on the international sustainability standards globally and locally. So locally we're having a lot lighter approach that I think is going through in June this year, around, you know, having to mandate report on climate disclosures versus what's globally recognized as sustainability and climate disclosures. So that's kind of the gold standard. And here in Australia, we might just have this green standard, this light touch. But I'm suggesting to you, as finance leaders of the future, to think about, what does being held to a gold standard look like for our business? And even if we don't have to report on it now, we will absolutely get there over the next 3 to 5 years. So why not hold ourselves to the highest standard possible now, or certainly have that as an aspiration in the next 12 to 24 months? So financial leadership, to me, it really talks about innovation versus cost optimization. It talks about redefining success, and it talks about how do we lead people and their thinking, and be that guiding light, that shining beacon in finance, to actually bring about change that we so need in our business world. So if you feel inspired, I have a Future Finance Thinkers Hub conversation happening on Tuesday the 16th of April. Please reach out to me if you'd like to register your spot. Reach out to me, have a conversation with me. I've got some green papers, if you haven't read them already, on how to do better business. I would love to hear from you.